Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about pointing out, we got up here on Nankoweap Creek there. You can see it flowing really well through the white area there. And Nankoweap Creek was flooded since late November when they did the last high flow experiment because of all the debris pushed out into the main channel there. When they do those high flow experiments, that delta will get removed. And typically, when that thing hasn't flooded for a few years, you'll have grasses and vegetation growing down where all that white is. In the Nankoweap Creek drainage there. And this has been the wettest winter in recorded history in Arizona. The backpacker said that the creek is flowing above the ground, above the spring, which is 2 miles up there.
No kidding.
I've never seen it flowing above the ground up there. I've probably only been up there 20 times maybe. And not necessarily in the spring, so much or anything, but pretty uncommon to have water flowing. It's just flowing. The water that's flowing is flowing through the gravels, underground. And then the spring is enough water to have it flowing on the surface. And I can't think of it ever not flowing on the surface down here from the spring.
So they came down that drainage?
Yeah, the backpackers came down the drainage, the trail. There's a few different routes, but the most common route has like a 4 or 5 mile traverse in the Supai, and then kind of drops down a ridge line to where the spring is, 2 miles from here. And if people on a shorter trip will commonly camp at the spring and make an outing down to here for the day, and then camp at the spring again, and then maybe a day exploring up around in there, and then up and back out.
Wow.
And when they come down here, they would come up where this four-way trail system is here. They'd come from that trail that comes from the left out of the drainage.
Okay.
The trail coming to us met the trail that we came up on, where it turned up and started going straight up.
We need some snacks.
And the trail going away from us, up on top of that ridge up there, is where the housing, evidence is from the Anasazi living down here.
Oh, okay.
And they, probably were just living down here in small numbers and farming. Using that process of dry farming that I was mentioning the other day. I guess it was yesterday at South Canyon. And old photographs of this area, soon after the dam from the 50s, 60s. There was none of this vegetation down here was here. Just huge, sand flats. And when you had these seasonal floods of approximately 80,000 cubic feet per second, you would have all that, sand deposited where a lot of those cobbles are, and that sand just blown away or flooded away in smaller floods, over the years since they've had the dam here. And there's no real good example. Well, there is maybe a bit of an example in this bay down here. And you can see kind of a sandbar, a half-moon shaped sandbar out in that bay there. And that greener area between the bay and the shore is what geologists refer to, or hydrologists refer to as a return channel. So when you have a big eddy, which is created by the water being squished down and then releasing that energy, it'll flow back upstream.
Yeah.
And that sand gets deposited where the energy's low, between the return channel where it's flowing faster back upstream, and then the main current where it's going downstream.
Yeah.
And if you look between that bay there, and then there's a bunch of these bigger mesquite trees, and you may not be able to ascertain it, but there's a hillside of sand there. And that hillside of sand is on this side of that hillside is the return channel for that, more or less 80,000 cubic feet per second.
Oh, gotcha.
And after those floods would go away, you'd have had all that sand deposited there, and that's when they would have practiced that practice of dry farming. The water would go away, and then they would plant multiple seeds in a hole and hope that the moist ground would germinate them. And then later in the summer, when the monsoon rains came along, would water them and ideally produce a harvestable crop. And a pretty tenuous situation in that you had to have those monsoon rains, as well as not any big monsoon rains up the river system that's going to create big floods that come down here
That would wash them out. Yeah.
and wash out your crops. And
Yeah.
an example of a situation like that was in 1923 on that U.S. Geological Survey trip. They were down below lava falls on a flow of approximately like 8 or 10,000 cubic feet per second. It portaged around lava falls, and got down below it where there was a spring coming in that they could utilize for fresher water than out of the river. And they went to bed that night, and the water started rising. And in the morning, they were tied up to the cliff, about 150 feet from today's river, and they estimated the flow at 110,000 cubic feet per second in September 1923. And they went from being at the bottom of lava falls to being in the middle of it. Had to wait a few days for the water to go down.
Was that a source from a local storm, or do they know?
Just a huge storm up, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, somewhere up there, probably days previously, and just finally got there, kind of a late August. And a lot of these, like the bigger Paria floods are, the biggest Paria floods historically have been a September phenomenon as well. And I don't know, why or what or how, you think of the monsoons more of a July-August thing, but it seems like some of those September ones can really pack a punch.
Dave, what would, before the dams upstream, do you know what the extreme lows would be upflow?
Yeah, I mean like around 1,000 CFS.
Really?
Wow.
And for example, extreme lows, Steve's grandfather, he did a trip down here in 1929, and they were down here in the summertime. I don't know what months, but they were on a flow of about 1,200 cubic feet per second.
Huh.
And there's a photograph of them portaging down the right side of a rapid we'll go through in a couple days called Hance Rapid, through these giant, like 6, 8, 10-foot boulders. This little tiny trickle of water going through there.
Wow.
And wooden boats, and they called that trip the Dusty Dozen.
Is that where we're going to have to portage?
No, we got plenty of water. And that low was typically a late September, early October phenomenon. And that's how they, today they consider a water year from October 1st to September 30th. Because that low is when, kind of everything was done flowing, and then it would start over again after that.
Any idea what the flow is today?
We see a high from the dam. They're fluctuating between, I think, 8,000 and 14,000 cubic feet per second. So we see a low of approximately 9,000 cubic feet per second because it gets stored in the eddies and in the system, and doesn't ever realize that low. And the high as well, probably somewhere around 13.5, 13.2. We see for the high, because it catches up and slows down, kind of comes upon it and leaves it.
So apparently the historic high floods would never come over this hill where you said there were some ancient homes.
Probably not. Yeah. There's evidence of these 300,000 flows, and and those may have gone into there, but. And the evidence of those flows is driftwood that they found, sheltered,
Right.
out of the weather.
Okay.
And then estimating, with the elevation of that driftwood, estimating, what kind of volume would put it there.
Right.
So I don't think there's any years. Well, the years could be associated just with the age of the wood, and but I don't know if the wood has ever been of high enough quality to be able to look back in the Denver chronological record to see when
it happened.
when it happened, or if they have records back that far even. The big library of that stuff is in the football stadium down at ASU.
Huh.
Is there, did this region experience anything like the Bonneville flood or the Missoula, Glacier Lake Missoula flood?
No, not that no dewatering events like that I know of. Yeah.
I mean, you'd get 300,000 maybe.
Oh yeah.
Something like that.
Oh, easy.
I've never heard of anything good.
No.
But what caused the switch, if you think it was, from going down Little Colorado, was probably somewhat kind of catastrophic.
No, it was more of just a slow uplift in the, where this drained into, going upstream. That would have slowly uplifted, You know, to the point where it just kind of laked up, didn't do anything, and then eventually got to the point where it could then start, you know, going, you know, as we think of it today, downstream.
That's the official word.
That's, you know, that's what their, you know, that's their understanding at this
The reason
point.
I have trouble with that is because the erosion rate is higher than the uplift rate. So if in fact that was what caused the switch, it would be an unusual sort of situation.
Well,
You see what I'm saying?
They worked with that erosion rate as you're discussing with the rate of growth of calcite crystals in caves, and then the rate of growth of these what they call mammary formations, which form on the upper part of the red wall limestone. And it's an expensive time period to date, so I don't know how many they dated, but they collected stones all over. You know, I mean, people that worked on that project, I'd go on private trips with them, and that was, you know, part of the task was, you know, getting up on top of the red wall and looking for rocks to collect. And so then we would, you know, get a GPS point of where they were collected, elevation, all that information. Then they brought them all back and, you know, set them all out, and then tried to decide which ones to test that dating on to try and determine that rate of down cutting. And haven't read that report and really talked specifically with people about it, but you know, that information's probably out there.
Is that a GS report?
No, they were cavers, you know, that kind of started coming up with this concept and wanted to get down here and start working on it. So, you know, came down here and, you know, and just started collecting that material and getting in the caves and measuring the rate of those rate of growth of the calcite crystals and that, you know, like, to be honest, I don't know if it's published yet or, you know, I mean, they certainly have that theory out there, and it's kind of the most plausible theory today.